Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review, of course from the 1.36 selection of vehicles. And after the Dallara pair, which you could easily argue are the two most significant cars of this update, this one I would say is, again, arguably the next most important. And the reason why isn't so much about the car itself, it's more what the car represents in the lineup of the game, because of course it's what we call here on the channel a high roller. The most expensive, generally speaking, classic or vintage cars in the Gran Turismo franchise. Now, for those of us who played the previous game, this car was significantly more attainable back then. 7.5 million credits compared to 12.5 now. That's a huge jump, but of course, it fairly accurately mirrors its real-world prices of around $11 million. Now, with that being said, a lot of people who have not played Gran Turismo 6 or various other cars in past games in the franchise, you don't have that point of reference, which is why a review is so important, because when you're spending that kind of money, millions and millions of credits, in this case well over 10 million, then of course you want to know, are you going to waste your money? Is it a car that you're going to like? Is it a car that you're going to use? And if so, how much use can you get? Because a consistent issue that many people have had with these Group X vehicles is that they are in Group X. So there's very little that you can do with them beyond the vintage events and lobbies. And that's about it. And the occasional event in the sport mode that will allow it to be used. So not a huge amount of use compared to a road car. Well, first and foremost, I would actually put a really strong assessment on this vehicle in two ways in particular, and that is, this is arguably one of the most significant high rollers that we've had in the game so far, in terms of being worth your time and worth your money. And the reason why I say that is, as I mentioned, for two reasons. One, it's significantly cheaper than a lot of the others. That alone is a huge advantage. 8.5 million credits separates this car from stuff like the 250 GTO, the P4, the Ford Mark IV, and the Jaguar XJ13. That's a massive difference. It's a lot easier to earn 12.5 million than it is to earn 20. You might not think so, but trust me, doing those extra grinds around Blue Moon Bay or Red Bull events, that's a significant amount less time it takes to earn this car. So that's one strike for it. What about the second thing? Well, the second thing I would argue is even more important. It's an N car. This is a bona fide street vehicle in the game in N300. That is perfect. And many of us wish that more of these high rollers could fall into that kind of category. Now, of course, many of them are far more pure race cars than this one, so of course that wouldn't be ultimately fair, but they still do deserve their own category. However, with this one you can race it against road cars, new, old, sometimes even super sports or exotic cars. So in that kind of sphere, in that field, can such an expensive and such an old car be more than just a collector's piece? Can it actually win races? Well, tomorrow on the channel, the first video of the day is going to be a tune for this car, and you'll see exactly what it's capable of. But trust me, this car is a lot better than its look, and even its initial feedback through the handling could have you believe, because this is a very slippery car when it's stock. It's very tail happy, it feels very much so like what it is, which is a road-going sports car, essentially a supercar of its time. This is a very, very early vehicle. 1961 is one of the oldest cars in the game, so it feels that way. It feels its age for sure, in a similar way to the old school Aston that we had recently. But even that one's a full-on race car, so it feels that much better. As far as this one goes, the key, really, to this car is that it demands tuning. You must upgrade, you must tune the 250 GT to get the best out of it. Now, that kind of goes without saying. You could argue that about most cars, but classics even more so. They wallow around, they've got soft suspension, skinny tyres, weak brakes, way too shallow gearboxes, so all of these things can completely revolutionise a car. I've talked about muscle cars in that regard a number of times on the channel. You can see a world of difference with a muscle car without even touching the engine. Just everything else makes it so much better. Likewise with this. Now, as far as power, it's actually very impressive for its age. 275 horsepower in 1961. That's a lot. That's a very powerful car. It's also got 221 pound-feet of torque from a 3 litre engine. And it's light. It weighs less than a metric ton, 960 kilos, which means that the horsepower per ton is actually very, very healthy. Even by modern sports car standards, 286 is really good. Now, is 12.5 million a whole lot of money for a car with roughly the same power as a modern day hot hatch? Well, yes, of course it is, there's no arguing that, but you have to factor in those two things in particular. One, it is an amazing collector's piece, just period, as all of the others are, but also it has so much more added merit because of the fact that you can use it. You can use this in pretty much any M-class event that a normal road car would be in. That is such a huge advantage. Even if it were 20 million, I would still say this car had that massive advantage over the others too. Now, it's not as quick. Categorically, it's not as quick as something like a P4, of course. Even a 250 GTO, I think it would probably struggle even against the Alpha TZ2, despite the fact that that car has far less power. But that doesn't change the fact that for what it is, this is a very good sports car, a very good classic, and kind of mini spoiler alert, in tomorrow's tune at Dragon Trail in N200 even, so detuned power, this is one of the fastest N200 cars I've ever built. So the raw potential is there. The problem with the car is when you first drive it, especially if you don't have someone helping you with the tuning or haven't tried to do a setup yourself, the initial impression that this car can give is a fairly negative one. It does not handle that well. It wallows, it slides, it feels kind of boatish, almost like, as I said in my first look at the update itself a few days ago, like a classic Aston, like a DB4 or DB5, this kind of signature bad handling classic sports car. Not bad for its time, but awful by today's standards. The difference is, because this car is light, small, and comes from a very heavy motorsport background, it is extremely responsive to tuning. So if you do decide to fork out the 12.5 million, which is a lot no matter what way you cut it, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Because chances are, if you're the kind of person who's going to spend that sort of money, you're probably a classic fan. Because of course, somebody who's not specifically a classic fan of cars like this, you have no reason to buy this car. There are faster, modern options out there, so of course by definition it's always going to be a speciality vehicle for certain players, myself included. For those of us who are that kind of player though, vintage fans, classic fans, car collectors, it's a great one to go for because it has so much history, so much heritage, so much collector's significance, and it's stunning to look at and to listen to, but it also happens to be really competitive in its field. N200 is a competitive category. You're talking NSXs, you're talking Integra Type Rs, you're talking Porsche 356s. There are some really strong N200 contenders out there, and the fact that this one can even come close to those, despite the fact that it's from 1961, that's a huge statement about how good this car can be. And I would actually say that with tuning in particular, this car is easily better than it ever was in Gran Turismo 6. I barely used this car then at all, apart from reviewing it and the occasional bit of tuning. Now I like it a lot more. It looks better, it sounds better, it's far more responsive to tuning, and because of the N-Class system, this is one of the relatively rare occasions where it favours the car instead of messing it up. So overall, it's definitely worth looking into if you are a collector, a high roller aficionado, and a fan of using your cars rather than just collecting them. But that's it for this review. Of course, stick around on the channel tomorrow for my tuning of the car, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.